No, I'm not level.
You're
I'm
not
more
level at
cock-
all.
It's like a cock. Everybody, when they watch the show, needs to watch it cockeyed. Hey, everybody, how you doing, guys? Welcome to another episode of Live here on Keystroke Medium. I am Josh Hayes here with my friend and co-host Scott Moon, and we are here with Andy Peloquin, who returns to the show. He was on the show in season 2, episode 30, which I know because I just looked up because we had a conversation about it in a post show, whether or not it'd been a year or two since he'd been, and it'd been 2 whole years since you've been on.
Are you
the
kidding
show.
me?
Almost to the day.
Almost to the day. It was April 17th. So yeah, April 17th, almost to the
Should we come back later?
That's what I was going to say. We could just do this in a couple of days.
Yeah.
My wife is making fun of me right now. My wife is making, come over here. Come over here. Get on the camera.
Get on the camera.
Oh yeah, you don't want to make faces on the camera. I see how it is. Yeah. she's very nervous, but she's making faces at me. She's nervous. Don't be nervous. You can come say hi. She just blew me a kiss. That was very sweet. Yeah, almost 2 years to the day. But let's call it quits, and then we'll come back tomorrow and just do the 2-year anniversary if that's.
And we could even like do a long episode, like start it at like 11 o'clock and then roll till 1. So it's a thing.
Keystroke Medium sleepover.
No, I'm definitely cool. We've never done it. We've never done a slumber party before. We should do that.
That would be fun.
This is our
as Andy said before the show kicked off. This is one of the hardest podcasts he does, just because of the stringent, strict nature of our podcast. So
the last minute demands.
Yes.
Yeah. They really ask a lot here, but I've learned since my last appearance here just to be ready for anything with these guys. So that's why I've got everything I need right here.
And in Andy's defense, Scott opened a beer and then I opened a beer, and Andy was like, "Wait a minute, nobody told me this was a drinking show," and he had to go run and get his beer. So, let's talk about some books you've been on. It's been 2 years since you've been on, and you've done a shit ton of work in that time. When you came on the last time, you had 3 or 4 books done, and now you've got almost a whole series done and more on the way. So
you also turn your voice into a robot.
If you can, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about Andy Peloquin and how you got started in writing.
Yeah, so I'm Andy Peloquin, author of what I like to call dark epic fantasy. It's always epic, but it goes to the darker side of things, delving in the underside of the humanity and cultures and stuff. I like writing assassins and thieves and bounty hunters and demons and monsters, but also basically dealing with the monsters that are inside our own heads, that we are the monsters in essence, instead of getting into all the horror stuff. I started writing I think almost 5 years ago. I've been doing copywriting as the day job for about 8 years now. And I always told myself, I'm going to write a book as soon as I have something to write about. I was always thinking nonfiction. And of course, I was fairly young when I started writing, around 23. So, you don't really have a whole lot to say back then. You're not an expert on anything yet. But then when I was around 25, 26, I had written this piece when I was in my teens, and a publisher picked it up and they said, "Oh, this is really interesting. We want to turn it into a comic book." And so that made me think, okay, well, if they like something that I'd written 5-6 years ago, what could I do now? And actually, thus was born the story that I'm going to be turning into the 6th novel of my current work in progress series, The Silent Champions. And so I did that. I think it took me 4 days of work. It was about 13,000 words. It was a comic book script that never got turned into a comic book. So now I'm going to make it into a novel. And thus was born the love of writing.
Nice.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of people get their start not doing comic book strips. They get their start doing other things and then kind of work their way into comics and screenplays and stuff. Have you always been kind of a comic book guy? Has that been your thing, and then just kind of worked its way into novels, or have you been a reader and that's kind of what precipitated the whole author thing?
So actually, when I was a younger teenager, I would say I was a hardcore reader, but I thought comic books were stupid. I thought comic books were for kids because I'd never read them before. And then a friend of mine told me, "Here, read this." And he gave me Deadpool. And thus was born an undying love of comic books after reading Deadpool and laughing my ass off for, I don't know, 60 issues, his first run, and then just devouring everything that I could find after that. And so I was definitely a hardcore reader, became an even more hardcore comic book fan. And so when it comes to creating my worlds, I've taken my love of comic books and used that to create awesome stories. Like what I loved about Marvel Comics was that you have, you know, the Avengers, you have the X-Men, you have the Fantastic Four, but then Wolverine goes and joins the Avengers. And the Fantastic Four, they team up with the X-Men to solve something, or Spider-Man does something with Deadpool. And so you have all these characters that keep crossing over and keep showing up in each other's stories or influencing other, you know, world events. And so that's how I've structured all of my stories, that every single book and story has some connection to the other ones.
Oh, that's very cool. I was actually going to ask when you brought that up, because the Marvel Cinematic Universe is, and it's kind of separated out, right? Like, so now you have the MCU, which is the Avengers and Spider-Man and all that, but then you also have the X-Men universe, which is kind of almost a completely separate thing. And I get the whole Fox Disney thing, but people that don't read the comic books might not know that all those things intertwine and interconnect, and they just look at it as two separate universes. So it's interesting that you made that comparison. I also like that you're linking all of your books. I've always thought it was neat when authors can have standalone series or books, but then also have callbacks or like little cameo references to other things that happen in other books.
And it's fun because you never have to build a new world from scratch. There's the sound of Scott's beer opening.
Yeah. I was trying to sneak it in. I was like, they won't hear me right now.
That reminds me of an episode of Rick and Morty, but
and then we've been.
Sorry. So building a new world from scratch is exhausting. It's awesome. It's so much fun, but it's exhausting because you have to take into account everything, literally everything. So now when I just write a new series, I just think, okay, I'm going to build a new city from scratch, maybe a new continent, but there's going to be all of this other stuff that my readers know and love that I can build off of. So there's this sense of everything is brand new, but there's enough familiarity that readers will immediately feel at home in every new story that I write.
It's kind of interesting because that's kind of what Richard Fox has done with Scott and I, our collaborative series, and kind of what Jeff Chaney's doing with his stuff too, is you have this big universe, but then you know, the world's big. So you have your universe, and then you have a story here, and a story here, and a story here. And I really love that interconnectivity. And like you said, the readers really pick up on it, and they love that type of, this could be something completely different, but you're like, I know what he's talking about there. I recognize that from another series. And that's really neat for me as a reader to see that stuff.
Do you think that builds depth throughout the series by having those kind of complementary type things? Does it ever inform, like the story you're writing now? Does it inform on the other stories as far as complexity?
Oh, absolutely. So I would say my flagship series is the Hero of Darkness series. This is book 1, the new cover, Darkblade Assassin. And so this is a 6 book. It's really epic. Everything is just these big magic, big stakes, evil gods, stuff like that, demons. And at the end of the first story arc, 6 books, he finds this big problem where he's presented basically kill 1 million people to save the world. It's a pretty tough decision. So he walks away at the end of this book trying to figure out what to do. And I, as the author, have no idea how he's going to solve it in the second story arc until I wrote this book and this series, the Heirs of Destiny series. That's the one I'm releasing now. The 5th book comes out tomorrow. And up until literally 2 chapters before I ended the book, I had no idea how I was going to solve the problem that the assassin character faces in his story arc. And then I just was writing and it came out, and I now know how I'm going to end the second story arc and how they're going to save the world, maybe without having to kill 1 million people. Just so being able to do these things, writing these stories that are interconnected, you can build these bits and pieces, things that you don't expect, but then you can also play on the knowledge that people have of, let's say, the religions. The religion in my world is the same. mostly across all of the different continents and cities and stuff. So when I say the secret keepers, people immediately know that they are alchemists. And alchemy is sort of my pseudoscience that I use to replace magic in my world. If I want something done in a cool way, it's an alchemist that ends up doing it. So I can say, okay, the character is a secret keeper. You immediately know more or less what he's going to do. But then with each new series, each new story, I can build another component of the story that ultimately, when you read it, you get a bigger picture of all the different religions, all the different cultures, all the different technologies that really does encourage people to just keep reading.
And your series, your universe is based on a non-Earth world, right? It's not like an alternative history or a medieval time. It's a completely different place.
Yeah. So the world is called Ainan, and there's also the main continent is called Ainan. So I said that the people are egocentric enough to call, to think that they're the center of their world. That's how I kind of explained calling the world and the continent the same thing.
Sure.
But then the series that I'm working on now is on a continent across the sea to the south of them, and it's sort of like a Northern Europe, Scandinavia style continent. That's sort of Roman legion versus Vikings. Oh, yeah. And so yeah, being able to build all these things is a lot of fun. I've actually refused to do a map of the main continent because once I do that, I can't keep building on new cities and new areas.
So that's interesting. I've kind of done the same thing. I mean, there's a couple different ways to build a world. You can build the whole world and then work inward, or you can build your section of the world and then expand outward as you write new stories. And there's two major paradigms, some people different ways. And whatnot. But what I am curious, I know this is jumping way ahead in our normal routine there, is I'm really curious if you're a plotter or a pantser at this point with the way these are developing.
So I am 75% plotter and 25% pantser. Like where I'm working at right now is in my book that I'm working on now, these characters, they found out there's a traitor super high ranked in their city. They go back to the capital city and they're trying to find out who the traitor is. Now I knew that they had to go back to the capital city to investigate, but I didn't know exactly what they were going to do. I have a few, plot points here and there. Mm-hmm. So I know that, okay, at the end of this chapter, they've got to have a run-in with this mercenary company, but how they get there, it's sort of, I allow the creative process, a little bit of pantsing. So I pants within a plot, let's say.
I like it. I actually like that a lot.
No, that's kind of essentially how I write as well. I mean, the high points, some of the things that you want to do with each scene. But as you start the scene, it may go differently. You'll still accomplish the same goal that you have when you started out to write that scene, but it may look different in the draft than you had planned originally.
Josh,
so the cool thing about doing that is like, so in this one, Trial of Stone, in like the second or third scene of one of the characters, he plays a game with his brother where his brother has to guess how many daggers he has hidden around his person because he's that kind of character.
Right.
And so if he guesses correctly, he gives his brother the dagger. It's just like a little game that they have between siblings. And so he gives his brother the dagger in chapter 2 of his arc. At the end of book 1, that dagger saves the brother's life. At the end of book 5, that dagger puts down the big bad guy. So nice. you can by having at least a basic plot, you can do these things. You can drop in these small things that pay off in massive ways later on in the story.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
See those, and we were talking earlier because I go back. I started out as a pantser, pretty hardcore pantser, and I do outlining and stuff now, especially to meet deadlines and things, and for collaborators. But sometimes when I write an outline, probably about half the books I work on, it becomes longer than I expected. Because like I'll divide my story basically into 4 parts with important things need to happen. And I'll get to the end of writing part 1 and it's like 26,000 words and the book was supposed to be 65,000 words long. I'm like, I might have to do some tweaking with that. So
you try to keep them short?
Well, it depends on the genre. Some genres are 65 to 75. Fantasy is always obviously much longer.
Yeah. So the last book that I wrote, book 2 of my series, is military, right? So I'm sure you guys who have written military, it's never just the battle.
Right.
There's the before, there's the strategy, then of course there's the character moments, where you got to have that little bit of character growth. And then there's the battle, and then there's the aftermath, the physical aftermath, and then there's the emotional aftermath. So by the time your battle's done, it's like 15 chapters and 40,000 words. So my last book ended up being 208,000 words.
Wow.
That's
and
huge.
this one is probably going to crack 220 by the time I'm done. Just because these things, they just keep getting bigger. And because there's 7 main characters. There's one point of view character, but he's got a team of 6 soldiers working with him. And so each one has to have their moment of character development. Yeah. And of course that plays into the story at large. And so then there's the tactics and the strategies, and then it just keeps getting bigger, but it's so much fun because you get to play with all kinds of things that you never would have expected.
So who's your favorite secondary character among those people you just mentioned?
That's such a tough one because
I know I'll put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, it's great because so the team is built. It's like a Rainbow Six style team, but in my fantasy world. And so it's built around a spec ops team. You've got your sniper, you've got your heavy artillery, you've got your demolitions, you've got the medic, the rifleman, and the scout, and then the sort of the officer. So there's these 7 characters, and each one of them has their little things that make them so fun. I personally, being 6.5 feet tall, I love the heavy artillery guy because he's got this crossbow that's the arms are like 3 feet long each, and it's basically a miniature ballista, and the bolts are like 6 feet long, and so he just shoots through 3 or 4 people at a shot, and he's this massive hulking guy. He's a lot of fun to write.
Awesome. So we get you and Charles KK together, and then Josh, I can stand beside him and pretend you're our parents or something.
Exactly.
Like, it's so nice to meet you guys.
You guys are huge. I mean, no, you're literally huge.
208,000 words is not a small feat at all. I think the longest book I've written so far is 97,000 words.
Wow.
And that was military science fiction. I have a plan to write one that's probably going to be around 150. Terra Nova 4 Hales War that I'm working on is probably going to be about 110. So that's probably going to be my longest work so far.
You seem to be trending upward. I've noticed this.
I have been trending upward. So my question is, when you get to that long, like I look at it, I'm like today I just passed 60,000 on Terra Nova 4, and I'm like, oh man, I just passed 60,000. But if I was writing one of your books, that's like a quarter.
Let's warm up.
That's about the halfway mark. That's about the halfway mark on my average book.
Yeah. So do you ever get in the manuscripts that long, do you ever get a burnout as you're writing it, and you get to like 120,000 and you look at the end and you're still like,
or how do you keep track of
75,000 words away from the ending, and you've got all this stuff going on? Do you ever get burnout on that long book, and how do you keep it kind of fresh in your mind as you're writing it?
So definitely, it's not so much burnout. I'm sure you guys, being hardcore workers, sort of the self-imposed deadlines. Of course, working with other people, you have real deadlines. But you have an idea in your head. Okay, I want to finish this book in 4 to 6 weeks, so that I can have the next book finished in X time, so that I can be ready for publishing. It's sort of this dominoes that you've got to keep in line, or else everything comes crumbling down. That's really what stresses me out. Is that I know that I have to finish this book by X date, and then when it runs long, it takes another week, and then 2 weeks, and then 3 weeks, and I'm feeling that stress.
You ever hypothetically say, hey, I just wrote X number of words today. Now I can obviously, because you have a good day, and you're like, I can obviously finish this book in 4 to 6 weeks. And then you go, and then the next day you try to write X number of words. And that's
Scott's never done that ever.
I don't do that. That would be irresponsible.
I'm not the kind of person who writes that sort of inspirational style. Like I obviously thrive on inspiration, but I know that when I'm sitting down to write, I need to get a chapter or 2 chapters, or 2,000 words, 4,000 words. So for me, it's always, I don't stop working until I finished the chapter or the scene or the amount of words that I need. So I usually have a pretty good idea of how long it'll take me to finish a book. Now, when it starts getting into, it needs more chapters to finish this battle, or more chapters to detail the aftermath, that's when it starts getting longer and taking longer. But usually I know that, like, for 120,000 words, it'll take me about 4 to 5 weeks of work.
So it's like 4,000 words a day.
I was just going to ask, what's your daily?
I have some days where I only do 1 2-hour writing slot. That's about 4,000 words. And then Thursday, Fridays, I do 3, which is about 12,000 words. So I do a weekly average of 30 to 40,000.
Nice.
Hold on, you say you do 4,000 words in 2 hours,
Give or take.
do you so
The question in the chat group is, does he mainline caffeine?
right, because
You know what?
I did 4,700 today, which is a good day for me, but it took me all day to do it.
So I have 2 things going for me. Number one, like I said, my job was a copywriter. So I know what it means to just sit down and just put words down on a piece of paper. So I've gotten used to that. And I'm also a little OCD when it comes to writing. So I can't stop writing until I'm done with a scene. So I do this thing where if I'm sort of getting bogged down a little bit in the details, I won't worry about them. Like, let's say right now, the scene that I wrote today, he goes into a tavern and he's sitting down talking with a mercenary friend of him. I don't write any of the details until it's important. Like I said, walks into tavern, sits down next to friend. And then I go on with the conversation, and then the people come and they're trying to kill him and all of that. And then later on, when I go back to sort of do the first draft, the polished first draft, then I take my time to really, make each word, the smell of the sawdust and the urine and the taste of the beer and all of that.
I like that those things are so closely together.
Definitely.
In this particular tavern, sounds like someplace I may have been at some point.
Pretty much every tavern where military and mercenaries hang out.
Right. Yeah. Very much. So
that's actually a really cool way to do it, and I found myself doing it that way a couple times this week, where I knew where I wanted the scene to go, and I knew once the scene got started what was going to happen, but I was having a really hard time actually just physically starting the scene because I didn't know how I wanted to start it. And so I spent a lot of time looking at it going, are we going to walk into the room? Are they going to be in the room already? And I spent so much time trying to figure out how to start it that I never actually got to the middle point that I knew what was going to happen. So it's really good. I like that went in and sat down and had a conversation and then just start, because then you can just roll with what you know in your head already.
Yeah. And because you're writing it, it may not work with the co-author thing, but when you're writing the story, let's say the palace, how many different ways can you describe a palace? There's millions, but how important is it if your characters are never going to actually go inside the palace? They're just looking, or the forest around you. If there's something in the forest, like there's an ambush coming, you have to know the terrain. But if there's no ambush and you're just covering distance, the kind of forest doesn't really matter until later. So you can focus on the story elements that matter by doing that. I just do it in caps, writing through forest. And then later on, when I go back and flesh it out, maybe the character is mulling over some problem while he's writing, so he doesn't notice. Or maybe he does notice and it's beautiful, or he's dealing with some emotional issue, so everything looks really bleak and dull. So it's easier to sort of focus on getting the emotional parts of the story out, the conversation, the highs and the lows, the action, the battle, the climax, the back and forth. And then later on, once I've got the story written out, I can go back and flesh it out. So it's usually about 30 to 40,000 words a week doing that thing where it's like, the conversation, all right, walks into bar, leaves bar, runs into people, and then the confrontation. And then it's another week or two to go and flesh that out and, to expand those details and make everything sound pretty.
Are you a full-time writer now? You still have your day job copywriting, or you just write books now?
I've kept copywriting about 4 hours a week, just in case, things go totally belly up and I need something to fall back on. But it's about 80% of the time that I write.
Awesome. Let's go ahead and hit our show sponsor here really quick. Since we're about halfway through.
So violent. Why do you got to hit them? Can't you just gently nudge him into the limelight?
This is the great part of the show where you get to look at Josh's profile as he reads the show sponsor. And now I lost the link. Hold on.
Josh's bearded profile. You forgot to mention.
It's my bearded profile. We're reading the bearded show sponsor. Okay, so this week's show sponsor is the Knights of the Dawn King, The Setting of the Sun by Scott E. Stabler. The sun is setting over the realms of Unithiri. I think I said that right. The lands of the lands have forsaken the memory of their liege and drift toward an age of horrific enslavement. Prophetic utterances are reaching fulfillment, while rumors of war multiply in the north and whispers of the Black Horde arise from the south. The mysterious race of the firstborn gather to reclaim their ancient homeland, even as the ruling houses succumb to greed and power lust. Over it all, an ancient and dark force rises to crush the only adversary who would yet make a stand against the swelling tide of its evil designs. A once proud and honored knighthood, now fractured and held in little esteem, their allegiance to the true High King waning from within. Thrust into seemingly random circumstances and prevailed upon by harbingers of myth and legend, one man is driven to desperate measures to save his family, and in doing so learns the true peril facing the lands. Hounded across mountains and realm by unspeakable evil and fettered by a burden of shame and guilt, he will come to understand the true friendship, sacrifice, and courage, and will, in the end, discover his place with the decrees of a king. Utilizing a backdrop of token-esque imagery, the Knights of the Dawn King, the Setting of the Sun, weaves a compelling new take on the ageless struggle between light and darkness, courage in the face of debilitating fear, bonds and championships strengthened in a forge of hardship, and epic scenes of battle and chaos all combine in this tale of sacrifice and love to compel the reader to ask one simple question: do I truly stand in allegiance to the king? And I always had of doom.
Mostly because of the vowel sounds used in that particular voice.
Yeah. So that's the Knights of the Dawn King, the Setting of the Sun. Look, that was a really long blurb, and I only messed up twice. So for that, I'm going to take a shot.
Everybody drink.
And everybody should drink as well.
It's not called a shot if it's beer.
That's true, and I don't know what that exactly the correct.
It's called a sippy.
Yeah. Okay. Everybody take it. Everybody take. Everybody take a sippy. Everybody take a sippy.
That's not. That can't be right. I think everybody should chug. Just chug.
Chug is probably better.
No, I definitely like sippy. We're using that from now on.
Sippy. Then you can defend it easier. Easier. Say, honey, I'm drinking out of my sippy cup.
You've been drinking out of my sippy cup
all day long.
When it's a big stein, you're like one of those liter size steins.
That's right.
Sippy cup.
I'm going to put the link in the show deal here. Here we go. If I can, somewhere. Wait for it.
Coral AZ says, "Whoa, when did we start the drinking game?" I said, "No, we're not starting a drinking game. That was a joke. We can't be responsible for that."
First of all, KSM is always a drinking game, so there's that.
We should have like a reel of all the different drinking games they've put on us for things we've said or done or whatever.
Kayleen, this needs to go on the next bloopers reel that we have a drinking game
involving sippy
collection.
Cups.
Yeah, sippy cup.
Drinking game collection catchphrases.
So you said earlier that you're an author of dark epic fantasy, and I think about that and I think of like Game of Thrones and like Peter V. Brett's the core, very just kind of gritty, not like Token, where Token-esque is kind of like a friendly Chronicles of Narnia, where it's all friendly and stuff like that. So kind of talk us through your version of dark fantasy and kind of why you went that route.
All right, so dark fantasy is basically fantasy that plays with horror tropes. Like you'll get a lot of the horror vibe. It's almost like you're reading a horror story with all those same feels, all the same tension, the highs and lows, but in a fantasy world. Epic fantasy is bigger. These bigger stories, things, there's more magic, there's more world-shattering events. So I say dark epic fantasy because like 90% of my books take place at night in some form or another. Whether it's, like right now, my characters they need to go find information, and it just so happens that they have to go out after dark. And the last battle was also after dark, and then everything happens at night. There's very little daytime and glow and brightness and magic and wonder like in your classic Tolkien novel or Shannara or wherever it is. So it ends up being inevitably dark. The Heirs of Destiny series, I wanted to write it for a younger audience, not necessarily, you know, teenagers, but for younger readers to get into. And so I started it out and I was trying to make it all happy and bright, and it just kept going darker and darker and darker. Where, you know, it's just death and murder and mayhem and intrigue and assassinations and stuff like that, which is always awesome and tons of fun to read and write. But I can never really get, you know, the more classic epic fantasy tropes, the more heroic stuff. Mine just ends up being inevitably darker.
Darker because of character choices, or darker just from other setting issues or plot?
Yeah, the setting issues, the things that happen to the characters. Like the characters themselves can be, you know, they can be good, like solidly good to the core, but they find themselves doing things in darkness all the time, whether it's, you know, underground tunnels or caves with monsters, or chasing assassins after dark, or being lured into underground alchemical layers. It's just the darker settings unintentionally.
One of our live chat people, Corvo AZ, says dark fantasy, imagine the Predator film and placed into an imaginary setting.
Yeah.
Which actually, yeah, that could be fun.
It's really got a more gothic feel to it, dark fantasy. You've got, you know, you've got monsters, and so you've got like a version of Vampire Hunters where it's not vampires, it's some other type of monster hunter. But it's you know, the classic. I mean, if you ever watched Doctor Who, any of the Doctor Who episodes, you'll know the sort of structure of a horror story, where it's, you know, these jump scares and these tense moments and things where there's darkness and shadows and things are, you know, uncertainty and all of that. Whereas in more epic fantasy, it's far less of that.
More like drawing the sword from the rock and armies against the forces of darkness. And
exactly. It's much more out in the open. You know, there may be some assassins, an assassin or two, but it's not everybody's an assassin, or the main character's an assassin. It's yeah, that's kind of the best I could do to explain my dark epic fantasy. Josh is talking.
What is he? What? So Kayleen Williams says, wait, Doctor Who is dark urban fantasy. Dark fantasy?
Doctor Who is classic horror, science fiction, but it's horror. Okay. If you watch 90% of the modern Doctor Who, I haven't watched any of the old ones, but almost every single of the modern Doctor Who, starting from David Tennant onward, just the way they structure the episodes, the way that they present the story, the music, the tension, the stakes, often the story outcome, it's just classic horror.
That's really fascinating. That I had not thought of it that way. I do feel like I'm going to radically change the direction we're talking right now, because that's what I do, because it's obviously it makes sense. But we need to talk about the elephant in the room, or actually that sword that's behind you, because
yes,
you got the sword there. And I know somebody in our audience is asking about the sword.
So this is called a flamberger, or a flamard,
right?
And it's a flame-bladed sword. It's a two-handed sword.
That's really cool.
And what's awesome about it is that it does as much damage as a sword that's as thick, because you can see how it's got the edges, but it weighs less. And when a sword, like, it's called the Glissade or Glissade, when it slides down like this, which is something that's a very common move in sword fighting, it can't properly do it. So like when it goes down here and it comes back up, like it'll almost flick the sword away. So this sliding maneuver is a common one that they use to once they're locked and they slide down to cut the person's hand or to get closer to the head or something like that. So it's a really cool sword, and it's used by one of the elite warriors in my Heirs of Destiny series. So I'm trying to get a collection of weapons, one weapon per series that I write.
You got a lot of props in the live chat that we got going on. A lot of people like your sword, so
thank you. This is an awesome one.
That's pretty cool.
I have this little tiny dagger here, which was used for my Thief Girl series. It's just a little utilitarian dagger, because it's the weapon that she uses. It's a super important element in her story. And then for my assassin, I need to get a long sword, and then for my new military series, I need to get a spear. Yeah. But I'm gonna collect weapons, one for each series that I write.
And they kind of seem like they're probably tax deductible, because they do actually on the story.
Research.
Yep. The research and props for podcasts.
Yeah, definitely. And then also there's a couple of historical European martial arts places in the city that I want to start taking classes at to actually learn a lot better. And that's another tax deductible one because it's research.
That's getting big, I guess. I have my best friend from like 4th grade. I got a hold of him, and he runs and MCs a lot of these. Well, he has some other business involved with it, but they do the jousting and stuff out in California.
Oh wow!
They do live jousting. He's always sending me stuff. It's pretty awesome. So he wants me to go out there and watch some jousting, which I will probably do.
That's awesome. So there are a lot more people in the US and also here in Canada that are getting into historical European martial arts, which not only is the sword fighting, but it's also the grappling and wrestling and hand-to-hand combat techniques that were used in Italy, France, Germany, Switzerland by medieval European armies and stuff. It's really fascinating.
Cool. Yeah, it's in when you pull out the Flamberger sword, I've heard of it and heard the word said, but I didn't realize about that. But as you're describing it, it makes sense that it would do more damage because it has more edge.
Yeah.
And it would, and plus obviously weighing less, I mean, just as strong and things like that.
And what's cool, there's this, if you can see here, there's this little hook thing here, this hook. And so you actually hold the sword. Right. It's a two-handed sword, but there's this technique called half swording where you grab it. And so you have a shorter blade ultimately. And so you can do faster attacks.
Different leverage point.
Exactly. But then you can also flip it and hold it by the blade. It's a whole thing. The blade gripping, you can do it with gauntlets. You do it even with just bare hands by holding it like this. And you can use this to hook shields or to hook down horsemen. So it can actually be used almost as a polearm as well as a sword. So it was super popular in Germany and Switzerland among those armies because there's massive swords. You'd never carry them in a sheath or anything. They're literally just carried over your back.
Yeah.
So I don't know if my mic is working now, but if it is
now. As a matter of fact,
I probably sound really weird because I'm using my headphones. I don't know why this mic isn't working. I'm still trying to figure it out. But I was wondering if those swords.
You just quit talking.
No, I did. I was like, screw these guys. But I was wondering, are those custom made swords, or are they just bought because they are similar to what you have in your books?
Yeah, they're just standard stock swords. I have looked into getting custom swordsmithing done. It is pricey, even more so up here in Canada than in the US. But depending on the weapon that I would want, if it's not available online or whatever, it would be worth looking into.
I'm curious about, because you have the two series that you talk about, the Trial of Stone, and then the other 6-book series that you mentioned, the Assassin series. How many series do you have planned in this universe? Do you think it's just going to keep going with new series, or do you have a final, like a capstone event, like the Avengers coming together with all these characters to cap off your universe?
Now, if I tried to do that, it would just be way too big.
It'd be like an 800,000 word book.
Exactly. So right now I have 3 series out. There's the first one, chronologically speaking, in terms of time, the Queen of Thieves series is the first one. So It follows a thief girl. It's 3 books long. And then there's a 4th standalone book, which is sort of a 3.5 to this one and a 0.5 to the Hero of Darkness series. Like, the thief girl ultimately ends up hiring the hunter to kill someone. That's their first connection.
Nice.
And then that sets off his story, all 6 books. And then the 7th book in the series is a crossover where he goes to her city and he's hunting a demon. She's hunting a serial killer. And so they end up classic superhero team up, where there's the misunderstanding at the beginning. There's the initial clash where they fight each other. Then they make peace. And then it turns out that they have to solve a common goal together and defeat a common enemy. Like, it's written like every single Avengers or X-Men team up, basically, because I love that. Yeah. And then those 2 series, they introduce different characters, younger characters that are together in this series. They're both in these different cities. And they both end up going to the same city for different reasons. They end up meeting up and teaming up and, saving the day, essentially. So in between these 3 series, it's 17 books. and they're all there. Like you can read them chronologically, like Star Wars 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or you can read them, like the proper way, which was Star Wars 4, 5, 6, then 1, 2, 3,
and then none of the other ones. Yeah.
So there's there's both ways to read them, and so just sort of depending on what some people like some people love the assassin character because it's something unique, and they're not super hot on female protagonists, but when they read the assassin character, they love the world and the story so much that they go back and they read the Thief Girl series, or some of them love the Thief Girl because there's just this amazing strength of character about her, and then when they find out that she hires the assassin, they're like, okay, now what? Let's keep reading. And so the stories, they end up interconnecting. So all 17 of these books, they work together to create one story. Well, 3 or 4 stories put together, but they're all interconnected. And
so are you going to keep adding on, like you said, like that's why you don't want to make a map of your world, so you can continue to add on, and you're just going to add on until the readers are done with it, or do you have an end point in mind?
Until I'm done. No, until I'm done, because each story has its own thrust. Like, so the Thief Girls series is all focused on her and her city.
Right.
And the Assassin series is big world at large. End of the world sort of stakes. The young adult series, the younger characters, it's all focused on one city, but then they end up sort of solving the Assassin's end of the world problems. So a couple of them are going to show up in the second 6-book story arc. But then after that's done, there's still, like the military one, the Rainbow Six style one is chronologically set 20 or 30 years before. But then there's characters from each that show up. Like actually the characters, they just finished fighting the assassin who had gone across the sea to take out a target. And they ended up, fighting him. And so each series is going to integrate bits and pieces of the other, and bring in characters, introduce new characters. So everything will be interconnected, but there's no real end of the world, end of the book, because it's life. There is no end. It's
right.
just, one story begins, one story ends kind of thing. And so I'll always be able to keep building and growing.
Just keep on checking them out there as long as it's fun and
readers are digging it. And so being able to introduce new characters, like in the second book, I introduced this giant who becomes a bounty hunter. In another series that I'm planning on writing. And
how big's a giant?
7.5 feet.
Okay.
So just slightly taller than Andy.
Yeah, just about a foot taller than me. And pretty much anybody taller than me, I'm counting him as a giant.
That's probably a fair metric. That's
well, he's like 8 feet, but so there's that. And then I just introduced, like, kind of accidentally, that the people who first came to this continent they're on, they were fleeing from my world's equivalent of Atlantis. So I have an Atlantis story that I originally published, and now I'm going to change it into my world and republish it either as a standalone or in a trilogy or something, and those people will ultimately become the people who colonize this new continent. And then there's another city where, I want to start doing a little bit more flintlock fantasy, where there's gunpowder weapons. So I've already introduced certain gunpowder type weapons, like there's grenades and things like that. Only certain people have them. So that when I write this other city, it's already been established. So readers will immediately recognize the name and the character, the little elements and stuff.
Flintlock fantasy is actually becoming kind of a thing. Brian McClellan does a whole series of Flintlock. I don't know if you call it Flintlock. I don't know if he calls it Flintlock fantasy, but I mean, he's got Flintlock weapons, but there's mages and different things in his series too. It's pretty interesting. Yeah.
That's actually, I think, where the name came from, is Brian McClellan. And there's J.P. Ashman, M.D. Presley. Those are 3 of the names that I know in Flintlock fantasy. And it's just something that I want to do eventually. It's not something that I have, landing gear on now. But by introducing those bits and pieces when the time comes, I'll have the groundwork will be laid. So anybody who's read, like let's say in the Thief series, the vault that's made that she breaks into, the most secure vault in her city, Ocean's 11 style bank heist, it's made with this special alchemically treated steel from the city. So immediately everybody's going to recognize the name of the city and the fact that there's this special steel. So now I have the platform built to say, okay, the city has better quality steel, good enough to make flintlock weapons right there.
Right.
So being able to do that, it allows me to plan what comes next and drop threads and build the world one piece at a time.
You mentioned earlier talking about like gods and demons and vampires, but not vampires, and all these other things that you include in your universe and your stories. Do you consider this like kind of a high magic fantasy, or I like for frame of reference, A Song of Ice and Fire is very low magic, where it's more the people and the characters using their own skills to advance the story, whereas in high magic you have fireballs or trolls or whatever. How do you classify that, and then how do you set up those rules for your story for the different characters that you have, so it's not just kind of the same thing?
So it's basically low fantasy, because the magic is very much a background thing. Like the assassin character has a magical dagger, and he's half demon, so he's got sort of demonic magic abilities, but it's more like Wolverine's healing factor. Like it's physiological, but it's considered magic because it's science we don't understand. Right. Essentially. Right. And so there's this ancient race, the Sereni, that they wielded powerful magics, and they've disappeared off the world 4,000 or 5,000 years earlier. So anytime I want to bring magic into the world, I just have to make it sort of an something that was created by them or left or abandoned by them. And so it gives me a way to play with magic. Like the series I'm working on now, the medic in my Spec Ops team, he has these healing stones. They're magic stones, but I've figured out the science to how they were created by the Sereni. And so like they're actually going to discover the scientific steps to making these magic stones that are used to healing. And so it's a fun way to sort of play with things, to play with the magic trope, to actually explain things in a way that's scientific, and yet still have the wonder of, oh my God, these stones can heal people. They can almost bring them back from the dead, kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, no, that's cool. I like that. I mean, because like if we took just the simple technology we're using right now to talk, hundreds of miles away through video and audio, we take that back to, I mean, just even the 90s. beginning right. Oh, you take it back to the 70s and 80s or the 1900s, and like, look at this voodoo magic that you're using.
Magic.
Yep. Exactly. So you can get away with so much. And alchemy is sort of my magic in the world. Alchemy is basically science for whatever I want it to do. Like the character in he's the demolitions expert in my Spec Ops team. He just gathers plants that happen to have names like, dragonweed or something. And he knows that they have certain properties that when he mixes them with something else makes them explosive. So he can create, a wall of fire that burns on a lake. The water is burning. And it's just alchemy, but it's magic, by another name. It's more fun. Right. And it makes it far less about the magical abilities. Like there's this sorcerer who can destroy armies. It's 7 soldiers against 3,000. And they've got this alchemy that can kind of give them an edge. But how do the humans solve this problem? It takes it away from the realm of magic and makes it all about, the ingenuity of humans and, how people can solve their own problems without relying too heavily on magic.
So the other question I have is, how do you, for such a big series, how do you keep it from kind of losing its connection to the reader? I don't know if that makes sense, because like for me as a reader, I'm very lined in and very honed in on character. Like if the character doesn't grab me, then I don't want to read the story. And so you have this big epic 17-book series, and some people look at that and they're like, oh, 17 books, that's going to be just a monster to start. But how do you keep it from becoming so big that it's just kind of unwieldy? How do you focus that down? Where would you suggest a new reader start for your series?
So basically every series is about characters. The story is incidental almost. And it's one reason that I've found that this military series went to 200,000 words. It's because, like I said, there's the preparations for the battle, which is the strategy. Okay, we've got 3,000 enemy and 200 men. That right there is good setup. But then you've got the characters, what are they going through? One of them happens to be attacking his own people for the first time. So that's going to bring some conflict. And then another one is, dealing with the loss of a loved one. So then there's that. And so the stories get bigger and bigger because everything is about the characters and their decisions, their interactions driving the story.
Right.
And so I know what every plot element, the ups and downs, the bullet points, as it were, But everything is driven by these characters. So if I want the character to, if I want to kill a character, which I do in pretty much every series I write, it's done for a reason, whether it's because it will affect the story at large, or whether it'll affect one character or the team, or it'll force them to do something else. Like, everything is super character driven. So what looks like a really big epic story is really just these really narrow, lean, focused stories on 3 people, basically, or 3 character things. There's the assassin and his story. His story is an outcast looking for a place in a world where he doesn't belong, which is something that everyone can relate to.
Right.
The thief girl is this innocent child who's turned into a thief and a killer by her circumstances. And she's 8 years old and she's smaller than everybody else. And yet throughout the whole book and the whole series, you see her rising to this position of prominence where she's leading assassins and thieves and strong arms because of her force of personality and her character. And so everything is driven by these characters. And it's what makes the stories, so easy to read through.
So probably the last question I have, I don't, well, it might not be the last question I have, but one of the questions I had is, we were talking about release schedules and
oh yeah, we should go into that.
Releasing the book pre-show, and it looks like you're releasing these books fairly quickly, and like you said, they're ridiculously long. So how do you go about that? I mean, a lot of people now are doing the 30-60 day release model, where they're hopping the cliffs and hitting the algorithms on Amazon. From a purely practical standpoint, I can't imagine it being possible to continually pump out a 200,000 word novel every 30 to 60 days.
No.
So what do you do as a producer, but also kind of an entrepreneur, as you're looking at doing the release schedule and the marketing for these books? How do you go about that?
So everything is planned out in advance. Before I had finished releasing the Hero of Darkness series, by the end, like the last book came out in October, but I started working on the Heirs of Destiny series in July. And I knew that I wanted to sort of have a January release date. So everything that I did for that series was to hit that. And I know now, like, I started work on this new Silent Champion series, knowing that I want to hit a September release date. So that's why I'm feeling stressed by these 200,000 word monsters, because it's taking twice as long. But I always have things planned out in advance so that it's never, oh my God, I'm coming up on this deadline. And what am I going to do? I'm feeling super stressed. It's more like, okay, I know that, like, I just got the edits back on book 1 on Friday, and the book is scheduled to release September 4th, which means I have 4.5 months to send out ARC copies to bloggers, to build a tour, to schedule stuff, podcast appearances, so that when September 4th rolls around, the stress is gone. There is nothing that I need to do to launch the book, because it's already been uploaded, it's already been formatted, everything's been taken care of way ahead of time.
And so that's the beginning of a new series.
Yeah.
And so then, when you look at the subsequent books, are you actively trying to hit the cliffs, or are you just, for book 2? What is your target for book 2?
Well, I'm still sort of figuring out. So I'm releasing 3 box sets over the summer.
Okay.
And I'm hoping that those box sets do wonders for my Kindle Limited reads, and I have a lot less worry about the daily income, because
yes,
that's kind of, as an entrepreneur, that's kind of what's driving, not the creative process. The creative process is 100% inspiration and love of the art. But in order to be able to do this full time, or most of the time, you kind of got to have the money side of things too. So having everything planned out so far in advance makes it possible. And so the box sets were done. It's going to be 3 box sets in a series of what will eventually be every single box set. Every single series that I write will just be put into the series of box sets.
Gotcha.
Do you contract out some of the services, like book formatting and obviously probably editing and all those things? But what type of things do you use? Okay.
Editing and cover art. I have an editor who takes a month to do every single book that I do, no matter how long. So I know that I have to get him the books at least a month or 2 before the release date. So it's why I have to do everything so far in advance. The covers, I could not draw a stick figure to save my life. So covers done. But formatting is actually, I do it all in Microsoft Word. It takes me a morning to do both paperback and ebook It's just super easy. I've been doing it for now 16 books. So I've gotten the hang of it, where it just takes more time for me to put I do little imagism for the chapter headings. It takes me more time to copy and center that and write out the glossary than it does for me to make sure that, the paperback's aligned and the ebook's properly formatted and stuff like that.
That's I just recently got Vellum, and I don't do most of the writing I'm doing now is collaborative, and I just write and send it off, and somebody else takes care of all the other stuff. But I got Vellum, and I've used Word, and man, I can't imagine doing a 200,000 word novel in Word and formatting it for. Man,
it's the same.
If I ever write a big ass book like that, I'm sending it to you for formatting, because I am not touching that.
It's just Control A, and then you apply your settings to the whole thing. It's really a lot easier than most people think. Like, I learned it by Googling it.
Yeah,
that was it. It's just, I do all of my writing in Word, so I kind of learned a little bit more of the ins and outs of it, but nothing really fancy. Right. Everything is just so simple. Like, I use Word to create an HTML file and upload that HTML file to Calibre, and it generates an EPUB that's just picture perfect. It's just that simple.
Interesting. Well, we are coming to the end of the hour now, and even though we started a little late, the book series you have out right now is the Heirs of Destiny. And book 5 is coming out tomorrow, you said, right?
Yeah, book 5 drops tomorrow, and unsuspectingly, I solved this massive world-shattering problem that it was just one of those holy shit moments that it's just amazing when these things happen. And so I'm super excited, because people will finally get an idea of how the next 5 to 7 book story arc of the Hero of Darkness series, where it'll go and how his problem will be solved. So I'm super excited to finally finish this series.
Awesome.
Sweet. There was there's a final question there.
Yeah.
You have a question? You have a question?
There's a final one in the live chat. They're like, it's of huge importance. Does Word start to lag or slow down after in a 200,000 word document?
It does not, but after a certain point, fantasy, you use all these words that don't show up in real life, and the names and the proper nouns. And so if you don't add, there will come a point in every single Word document where it says, I'm sorry, we give up. We can't do the corrections and stuff and typos. So then it won't do the autocorrect, and it won't say, you're using the wrong punctuation here. So you just got to make sure to, like, every new weird name or every new thing, add it to your dictionary, and then it'll just work perfectly for the whole thing.
I've known several editors and writers who've had a problem with Word crashing, and I've never had it happen, and I've always wondered how that happens. But I don't know.
It has happened to me a few times. I've been using an older version of Word because upgrading to the new ones is expensive, and I haven't wanted to do it yet. I'm still working in Word 2010, and so it's an older program, so there are occasional crashes, but thankfully nothing too serious that I haven't been able to fix or to recover. It's just basically, saving every 5 minutes or something.
Yeah,
every time you pause, you just hit Control S, and you just keep going, and it's actually it's probably the best word processor, the best hardcore writing program out there.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Except for Scrivener.
I was just going to say, what?
No. The thing is, Scrivener has had a lot of issues with Dropbox and Google Drive, like syncing issues and stuff like that. Microsoft Word doesn't have those capabilities. It's just sitting on your computer. You just write the words and it's done. Like, hardcore word processing, nothing can beat Microsoft Word. Scrivener has a lot more variety, a lot more
organizational type stuff.
Yeah. But just straight hammering out words, nothing beats Microsoft Word.
I could side with you there. I will side with you there. Word is a good writing process. And now JR is going to take that way out of context, and he's going to play this on a loop that says I say that Word's the best. It's not what I said. Good. But thanks for taking time out of your day to come and talk with us. I know that you had a show right before this one, so it was kind of a cram to get into this one, but I'm glad we were able to make it happen. We're going to have you on the show again, but not wait 2 years to do it.
Yeah, definitely.
Because obviously, the first time we had you on the throat, you had 3 or 4 books done, and now you have 16. So that's a huge
18.
gap in 18. So you go from 4 to 18. We need to get some stuff in the middle there.
By this time next year, I'll have 24 plus 5 box sets.
Yeah, we're definitely going to need you to have, because I'm interested in the
box set episode. Every time you use
that's what I was going to say.
Well,
let's see how the box sets do.
Yeah.
So everybody in the live chat, thanks for hanging out. I'm really weirded out now because I don't have a microphone in front of my face, and so I feel like I need to be leaning in, but I don't really need to.
You kind of do whatever you want, really.
It's very freeing, actually, not to have them.
You can walk around the house.
I know. I'm gonna go sit on my couch and hang out. Thanks everybody for hanging out with us tonight during the live chat. If you're listening on the audio feed and you have not experienced live chat, you definitely should. Every Monday night at 8 p.m. Central, we have an episode on our YouTube channel, Keystroke Medium. If you have not subscribed to our channel, please do so and give this video a like, share it around. And as always, thank you guys for coming in and enjoying the shenanigans in the live chat. This is a shout out to Rick in particular, because at the very beginning of the show, Rick posted first in the live chat, which is actually false, because when I created the show, I went and typed first as soon as I created the show. So technically, Rick, you weren't first. I was first. But then it really disappeared. It's not really a shout out, but Andy, again, thanks so much for coming on the show, and we'll have to have you back on, man. It was fun.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Next time I'll make a bigger drink.
Yes.
Yes.
We need to come up with the next time Andy's on the show, we need to have a drinking game specific to that episode, and then we can just get all slosh faced.
Perfect.
All right. Well, everybody take care. Wait, let's see what we got going on this week. I think we have. Why am I in November? That's not good.
We can tell us about November. I mean, who knows?
I don't know what's going on in November. Jamie Davis will be on the show next week, and then Larry Correa and Casey Azell will be on the week after that. It's a packed full show. We're packed all the way through July, so we've got tons of good content coming your way. So come back next time, guys. We're going to talk about some reading. We're going to talk about some writing, and of course, everything in between right here on Keystroke Medium. You guys have a fantastic Monday. Peace.
Laters.